Thank you for viewing my video. Please like, subscribe, and share if this video was helpful. Before I start, I would like to say that I in no way hate women, intend to bash women, or dehumanize women. This video is for the purpose of looking to the past to bring a better future for our families. This is part one of a three-part series I pray to complete. The next will be on families, and last on the unwise Jezebels of the family, male or female. Many of us profess to follow the scriptures, so my intention is to show what it says we are to do and how we are supposed to be. Many people hold women like Sarah and Rebecca in high esteem. Some even go to the point of saying, I want to be just like them. But do you? How many of us actually know how they lived, and is it for this time? You will notice that a virtuous woman varies from the Septuagint to the KJV. Question: do you have a good reputation? As a man living in America, I've had people say good and bad things about me, but I push to have a good name above all. A wise man once said, a fair name is better than much wealth, and good favor is above silver and gold. The Septuagint double taps on this in Proverbs 3:15. And she is more valuable than precious stones. No evil thing shall resist her. She is well known to all that approach her, and no precious thing is equal to her in value. This is different in the KJV, which says, she is more precious than rubies, and all the things that thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. Granted, this is about wisdom, but it still goes hand in hand. And this is something that follows you wherever you go, whether you are good at your job or good at anything. And if a bad rumor travels about you, it can affect you and those who are close to you. Let's look at what people are saying about Ruth. If you look at Ruth chapter 3, verse 10 through 12, this is after Ruth talked with Naomi. She went to Boaz with humility, and he told her that he would grant her whatever she wanted. He also explained how the whole town was talking about how she is a virtuous woman, exceedingly kind, and that they noticed that she's not running after the young man or the rich man. So as you can see, we usually get our titles by witness observation. No one can proclaim themselves to be wise, virtuous, or a scholar, and a list of other titles. These are just a few points to consider if you want to proclaim to be righteous or virtuous. Proverbs 31:10 asks a great question. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her worth is more than rubies. In the Septuagint it says she's worth more than precious stones, making it more than just rubies, which I think makes her more costly. Both agrees with Proverbs 3:15, and she is more valuable than precious stones, which compares a virtuous woman to wisdom. Ecclesiasticus 26:1-3 calls the man blessed who finds her. She will double the days of his life. She will let him live in peace all the days of his life. Please keep in mind, men, that in order to get this type of woman, you must be righteous and diligent as well. Ecclesiasticus 26:23 says, a wicked woman is given as a portion to a wicked man, but a godly woman is given as a portion to him that fears the Most High. In the Hebrew Concordance, a virtuous woman is 24:28. And the Hebrew word is chayil. The definition: strength, efficiency, wealth, and army. We're going to take you through Proverbs 31 to look at the attributes for a virtuous woman, so we can build upon ourselves. I will separate each scripture to show how they vary. Please give your understanding in the comment on each point if you are inclined to. I will read the KJV, but post both versions. Then I will discuss what I see between the two. Comment if you see a difference or the same. So let's begin. Proverbs 31, verse 11. The heart of her husband doeth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. So in this first one, I believe they both speak on how her husband trusts in her and would feel like he is already rich and doesn't need great possessions because of her. Verse 12. She would do him good and not evil all the days of her life. The Septuagint says, for she employs all of her living for her husband good, in which I think they both agree. Verse 13, she seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. In 13, it's a little different. In the Septuagint, it says, gathering wool and flax, she makes it serviceable with her hands, which speaks of her listening and now doing what she has been taught, while the KJV seems to say she willingly works with her hands in general. Verse 14, she is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. In verse 14, they seem to both agree and say she's like a merchant ship and procure her livelihood through such. Being a person who trades, you have to work well with others and have a universal communication skill, connecting her family with other businesses. In verse 15, she riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. In verse 15, it's a little different at the end of the verse. In the KJV, it says, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens, as if her household is separate from her maidens in the food area and giving of meat. While the Septuagint is a little more clear, and it says, and gives food to her household, and appointed task to her maidens. Verse 16, she considereth a field and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. In verse 16, they both agree. It explains how she, with the fruit of her hands in one business, gives her the ability to grow another business. Entrepreneur. Verse 17, she girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. In verse 17, I think the KJV is a little vague, while the Septuagint is more specific. The KJV reads, she girdeth her loins with strength and strengthen her arms, while the Septuagint says she strengthens her arms for work. Verse 18, she perceiveth that her merchandise is good, her candle goeth not out by night. I think that verse 18 varies a lot in the KJV. It says she perceiveth her merchandise is good, while the Septuagint says that she finds that by experience that work is good. Then both continue to say her candle goes not out by night. Contextually, the Septuagint makes more sense to me. It says that by experience she finds that work is good, so she works through the night. I interpret candles goes not out by the night to mean that, due to them having a lack of electricity in that time, so she's working throughout the night, so the candles stay lit. Verse 19, she layeth her hand to the spindle, and her hand holds the distaff. In verse 19, the KJV simply talks about things to do with the spindle, the distaff having to do with the spinning of the spindle, while the Septuagint says she reaches out her hand to do needful works, being more broad and can include anything around the house that needs to be done, which includes the spindle as well. In verse 20, she stretcheth out her hand to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. In this verse, we see that both of them agree, and that she's helpful to the needy and to the poor. Verse 21, she is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Alright, so in the KJV it says that she's not worried for her household, while the Septuagint says her husband is not worried about the household. Well, I think it speaks more on his trust in her ability to keep the household afloat while he's gone, which I also think makes her a more valuable woman. But I wonder why it says in the KJV that they're clothed in scarlet. What does that have to do with the snow? Does the scarlet keep you warm? Verse 22. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Again, it seems the KJV is centering on the woman and her clothing, while the Septuagint says she makes clothes for her husband and some for herself, seeming to focus more on the husband first than her. Verse 23, her husband is known in the gates, when he sitteth among the elders of the land. The wordage of the KJV to me sort of disconnects from verse 22, while the Septuagint explains that he becomes distinguished because of what she does in verse 22. Verse 24, she maketh fine linen and sells it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. In verse 24, they both agree, except for when in the ending for the Septuagint, it says, she opens her mouth heedfully or carefully, and with propriety, which means what is socially acceptable, or in the biblical case, what is culturally acceptable, and controls her tongues, meaning she practices self-control. Verse 25, strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in the time to come. I would say that they both agree that she clothes herself or covers herself with strength and with honor, and she will rejoice in her latter days. 26, she openeth her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is the law of kindness. In verse 26, it sounds well until you get to the ending, while the KJV says, in her tongue or speech is the law of kindness. The Septuagint says she speaks according to the law, period. I can say that I was wondering what the law of kindness was before this makes it clear. Verse 27, she looks well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. It seems that both agree that she watches over her household and is not lazy. Verse 28, her children arise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. In verse 28, it seems to connect with verse 27, thus making the household include maidservants, sort of like what Abraham had that was passed down to his children. But the difference I notice in the Septuagint, instead of saying a child raised up, it says the children become rich. Yet both agree that she shall be praised by her husband. Verse 29, many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. In verse 29, it seems that both are the same except for the Septuagint stresses that she's above any type of virtuous woman, and like her substance exceeds that of anyone else. Verse 30, favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth Yah shall be praised. I love both forms of this scripture, but the Septuagint seems to flow with the text in my opinion. It says how beauty and charms are vain, and through wisdom is a woman blessed. Then says, let her praise the Most High. But the Septuagint says The woman who fears the Most High shall be praised. I could be wrong, but I think that it directs the praise to her instead of the Most High. And finally, verse 31. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. In this one, the KJV says, give her of the fruit of her hands, which speaks towards the works in the physical. But the Septuagint says, give her of the fruit of her lips, or mouth, which seems to imply spiritual works. And at the end of the verse, it says, let her works praise her in the KJV. But in the Septuagint, it directs the praise to her husband, saying, let her husband be praised in the gates. Thus, putting it back in proper order. Thank you everyone who took the time to read along with me. I pray that it was beneficial to everyone. I will post the points if you'd like to write them down. Shalom.